Lieutenant Marcus Webb stood at Gate 7 of the Greyhound Terminal in downtown Atlanta, his ticket and military ID in hand, ready to board the 3 p.m. express to Fort Benning, when a white security guard with a buzz cut and a perpetual sneer blocked his path, looked him up and down with disgust, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "Not today, pal. You're not getting on this bus." Marcus, a 35-year-old decorated Army lieutenant with 12 years of service, 2 tours in Afghanistan, and a chest full of medals back home, was dressed in plain clothes, a simple gray hoodie, jeans, and sneakers, because he was traveling, off-duty to surprise his mother for her birthday, and he had specifically chosen not to wear his uniform because he wanted a quiet, peaceful journey without the attention that comes with military dress. But this guard, whose name tag read Derek, didn't see a decorated officer, didn't see a man who'd sacrificed years of his life defending the very freedom Derek took for granted. All Derek saw was a black man in a hoodie, and in Derek's narrow, bigoted mind, that was enough to assume criminality, to assume threat, to assume this man didn't belong. Marcus kept his composure, the way he'd been trained, the way he'd learned to survive in a country that often viewed his blackness as inherently suspicious, and he calmly said, "Excuse me, sir, but I have a valid ticket and ID. I'm boarding this bus." Derek smirked, crossed his arms over his puffed-up chest, and replied, "I don't care what you got. I said you're not boarding. Now step aside before I call backup." The waiting area fell silent. About 40 passengers scattered across the plastic blue seats, some scrolling their phones, some pretending not to notice, some watching with that uncomfortable expression people get when they witness injustice but don't want to get involved. An elderly black woman sitting near the vending machines shook her head slowly, her weathered hands gripping her purse tighter because she'd seen this story play out 1,000 times in her 70 years of life. A young white couple with backpacks whispered to each other, the woman looking concerned, the man pulling her closer as if to say, "Stay out of it." A middle-aged Hispanic man in a construction vest stood up slightly, then sat back down, conflict written across his face, wanting to help but afraid of becoming the next target. Marcus took a breath, his jaw tightening, and asked with forced patience, "What's the reason I'm being denied boarding? I've committed no crime, violated no policy. I have my ticket and identification right here." Derek stepped closer, invading Marcus's personal space, his breath reeking of coffee and ego, and he said, "The reason is I don't like your attitude, and you look suspicious. That's reason enough. Now get lost before I have you arrested for trespassing. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe to Axiom USA for more powerful stories of justice and resilience." Marcus felt his heart rate increase, not from fear, but from the deep, burning frustration of being reduced to a stereotype, of having his humanity questioned, of being guilty until proven innocent simply because of his skin color. He could have pulled out his military ID right then, could have flashed his rank and watched Derek's face crumble, but something in Marcus resisted. Why should he have to prove his worth, validate his existence, justify his right to basic dignity? By presenting credentials? Why couldn't he just be treated like any other paying customer, any other human being trying to catch a bus? But Derek was escalating, his voice getting louder, attracting more attention, and he started accusing Marcus of causing a disturbance, of refusing to comply, weaponizing the exact language that's been used to criminalize black men for generations. Another security guard approached, a younger white guy named Tyler, according to his badge, and Derek immediately enlisted him, saying, "This guy's refusing to leave. I think he's trying to sneak onto the bus without a ticket. Probably going to cause trouble." Tyler looked uncomfortable, glancing between Derek and Marcus, clearly sensing something was off, but not willing to challenge his senior colleague. Marcus maintained his calm, even as his insides churned with rage and humiliation, and he repeated, "I have a ticket, I have identification, I'm a paying customer with every right to board this bus." Derek laughed, a cruel, mocking sound that echoed through the terminal, and he turned to the small crowd that had gathered, performing for them. You hear this guy? Thinks he can just walk on any bus he wants? Probably doesn't even have money for a ticket. Probably trying to scam the system. The racist assumptions were piling up. Black man equals poor, equals criminal, equals threat, equals less than human. The elderly black woman finally stood up, her voice shaking but firm. Leave that young man alone. He hasn't done nothing. Wrong! Derek whipped his head toward her. Ma'am, if you don't sit down and mind your business, you'll be removed from this terminal too. She sat, tears of frustration in her eyes, and Marcus gave her a small nod of gratitude because her voice, even silenced, reminded him he wasn't alone. A young black teenager, maybe 17, wearing a high school Letterman jacket, watched, with wide eyes, his hands trembling slightly, because he was seeing his own future. No matter how good you are, how educated, how accomplished, in some people's eyes, you'll always just be a threat in a hoodie. Marcus decided to try one more time, pulling out his phone to show his digital ticket confirmation, his ID clearly visible on the screen. Here's my ticket, here's my driver's license, everything you need to verify I'm a legitimate passenger. Derek didn't even look at the phone. He slapped it away, not hard enough to knock it from Marcus's hand, but dismissive, disrespectful, degrading, and he snarled, I don't need to see nothing. I told you to leave. Are you deaf or just stupid? That word hung in the air, stupid, coupled with the physical dismissal of his attempt to comply, and several passengers gasped audibly. The young white woman from the couple stood up, her face flushed. This is wrong. He's just trying to show you his ticket. Her boyfriend grabbed her arm. Babe, don't... But she shook him off. No, this is discrimination. Can't you see that? Derek turned his glare on her. Miss, I'm going to ask you once to stay out of this. This doesn't concern you. She stood her ground, voice shaking but determined. It concerns all of us when someone's being treated like this for no reason. If you're seeing the power of standing up for what's right, hit that like button and share this story to spread awareness. Axiom USA brings you stories that matter. Derek radioed for additional security, his ego now fully invested in winning this confrontation, in proving his authority, in putting this black man in his place. 2 more guards arrived, both white men in their 40s, and Derek briefed them with a completely fabricated narrative. This individual has been aggressive, refused multiple instructions to leave, doesn't have valid documentation, and is causing a scene. Marcus looked at these new guards and saw the same script being written in real time. 3 white authority figures against 1 black man. The math of injustice that's played out in bus terminals, traffic stops, stores, parks, everywhere across America. One of the new guards, whose nameplate read Garrison, asked Marcus directly, Sir, do you have a ticket for this bus? Marcus, exhausted but still controlled, replied, Yes, I do. I've tried multiple times to show it, but Officer Derek has refused to look at it. Garrison nodded slowly. Can I see your ticket and ID, please? Marcus handed them over, and as Garrison examined them, Derek interjected, Don't believe anything he shows you. These guys fake documents all the time. The racist dog whistle was now a bullhorn. These guys. And Marcus felt something shift inside him, a lifetime of swallowing indignities crystallizing into a moment of decision. Garrison looked at the documents, looked at Marcus, looked at Derek, and said carefully, These appear to be legitimate, sir. Tickets valid for the 3 p.m. departure. ID matches the name on the ticket. Derek's face reddened. I don't care. I already told him he's not boarding. My decision stands. Garrison seemed torn, caught between backing his colleague and acknowledging the obvious injustice, and in that hesitation, Marcus saw the complicity of silence, the way good people enable bad ones by refusing to intervene. The bus driver, a middle-aged black woman named Patricia, who'd been watching from her driver's seat, finally stepped off the bus, clipboard in hand, and approached the group. She looked at Marcus with a knowing sadness, then at the guards and said, What's the problem here? Why isn't this passenger boarding? Derek jumped in. Security issue. He's been denied boarding. Patricia raised an eyebrow. On what grounds? Derek stammered. Suspicious behavior, no valid ticket. Patricia cut him off. I can see his ticket from here. It's printed on his phone screen. This ends? Subscribe to Axiom USA right now so you never miss stories of courage and justice that need to be told. Marcus, watching this unfold, made his decision. He reached into his pocket, not for his regular ID this time, but for the leather wallet he kept his military credentials in, the one he hadn't wanted to use because he shouldn't have to weaponize his service to be treated with basic human dignity, but Derek had left him no choice. He opened the wallet, pulled out his military ID card with his rank clearly visible, Lieutenant Marcus Webb, United States Army, and held it up silently, letting it speak for itself. The reaction was instantaneous and devastating. Tyler, the younger guard, went pale. Garrison's eyes widened and he immediately stepped back. Patricia nodded with grim satisfaction. And Derek? Derek's smug expression crumbled like wet paper, his face cycling through shock, fear, panic, and desperate backpedaling. The crowd erupted in whispers, gasps, and a few scattered "oh damns." The elderly black woman smiled through tears. The teenager in the Letterman jacket stood straighter, hope flickering in his eyes. The young white woman who'd spoken up earlier said quietly, I knew it. Derek's mouth opened and closed several times before he managed to sputter. I didn't know. You didn't say. Why didn't you? Marcus's voice was quiet but cut like steel. Why didn't I tell you I'm a military officer? Because I shouldn't have to. I'm a paying customer with a valid ticket. My rank doesn't make me more human than anyone else. But you treated me like I was less than human because of how I look. The words landed like hammer blows, each one puncturing Derek's attempted defense, exposing the rot beneath. Garrison cleared his throat, clearly wanting to salvage something. Lieutenant Webb, sir, on behalf of Terminal Security. I apologize for this misunderstanding, Marcus interrupted. His voice still controlled, but with an edge of steel. This wasn't a misunderstanding. Officer Derek saw a black man in casual clothes and made assumptions based on racial bias. He refused to look at my documentation, dismissed my attempts to comply, physically swatted my phone away, insulted my intelligence, and threatened me with arrest for the crime of trying to board a bus I had every right to be on. Each accusation was accurate, undeniable, witnessed by dozens. Derek tried to interrupt. Now wait a minute, I never said anything about race. Marcus continued. You didn't have to say the word. Your actions said it clearly enough. How many white passengers have you stopped today without cause? How many white men in hoodies have you accused of not having tickets before seeing their documentation? How many white people have you told looked suspicious just for standing in line? Silence. Derek had no answer because the answer was obvious. Patricia, the bus driver, spoke up. Lieutenant, your bus is ready to board whenever you are, and I'll be filing a formal complaint with terminal management about this incident. Garrison nodded nervously. That's appropriate, and we'll be conducting a full review. Derek, finally finding his voice again, tried a different tactic. Sir, I was just doing my job. Following protocol? Marcus shook his head. No. You were abusing your authority and targeting me based on racial profiling. Protocol doesn't include refusing to look at valid documentation. Protocol doesn't include insulting passengers. Protocol doesn't include assuming criminality based on appearance. Tyler, the younger guard, who'd remained mostly silent, suddenly spoke up. He's right, Derek. You didn't follow any protocol. You just decided he didn't belong the second you saw him. The betrayal from his own colleague visibly shook Derek. And Tyler continued, I've watched you do this before. Man, and I've stayed quiet, but I'm not staying quiet anymore. This is wrong. The crowd erupted in applause. The elderly black woman stood and clapped loudest, and Marcus felt a wave of vindication mixed with sadness. Vindication that truth was prevailing. Sadness that it took revealing his military rank to be believed, to be valued, to be seen as worthy of basic respect. The terminal manager, a thin white man in his 50s named Mr. Henderson, came rushing over, clearly having been called by someone, and he was already in damage control mode. Lieutenant Webb, I am so deeply sorry for this incident. This is absolutely not how we treat our customers, especially not our service members. Marcus held up a hand. Mr. Henderson, I appreciate the apology, but I need you to understand something. I don't want special treatment because I'm military. I want equal treatment because I'm human. Every person in this terminal deserves the same dignity, the same benefit of the doubt, the same basic courtesy that was denied to me today. Henderson nodded vigorously. Absolutely, you're absolutely right, and I assure you there will be consequences. Derek, you're suspended pending a full investigation? Turn in your badge and radio immediately. Derek's face went from red to ashen. Suspended? For what? I was just... Henderson cut him off sharply. For racial profiling, for refusing to follow proper verification protocols, for creating a hostile environment, and for bringing liability to this company. Now, turn in your equipment. The crowd watched as Derek, his hands shaking with humiliation and anger, slowly removed his badge and radio, handed them to Henderson, and walked away without another word. His authority stripped, his bias exposed, his consequences beginning. If this story is hitting home, make sure you're subscribed to Axiom USA and turn on notifications. We share powerful, true stories that shine light on injustice and celebrate those who fight back. Marcus boarded the bus to applause from other passengers. The elderly black woman touched his arm as he passed and whispered, "Thank you for standing strong, baby." And the teenager in the Letterman jacket met his eyes with a look that said, "I see you. I hear you. You gave me hope." Patricia, the bus driver, gave him a respectful nod as he found his seat. And as the bus pulled out of the terminal, Marcus looked out the window at the place where he'd just fought a battle he shouldn't have had to fight. And he thought about all the Marcus Webbs out there who don't have military credentials to pull out, who face the same racism but without the rank to force accountability. And his heart ached for them even as he celebrated his own small victory. The story didn't end at the bus terminal. 3 days later, after Marcus had surprised his mother, celebrated her birthday, and returned to his base, he received a call from Mr. Henderson informing him that the terminal's full investigation had concluded. Derek was terminated for violating company policy and civil rights law, and terminal-wide anti-discrimination training was being implemented for all security staff. Tyler, the guard who'd spoken up, was being commended for his courage and promoted to senior security officer. The young white woman who'd stood up for Marcus had written a detailed witness statement that corroborated everything, and her testimony, along with multiple cell phone videos that passengers had uploaded to social media, had gone viral, sparking conversations about racial profiling in transportation nationwide. Marcus was invited to speak on several podcasts and news programs about his experience, and he used every platform to emphasize the same point. I was fortunate. I had credentials that forced people to reconsider their prejudice. But millions of Black Americans face this same discrimination every day without any way to prove their worth. We need to change the system that requires Black people to be exceptional just to be treated as equal. We need to dismantle the bias that sees Blackness as inherently suspicious. We need to hold accountable those who abuse their power to enforce racism. The elderly Black woman from the terminal, whose name was Mrs. Dorothy Green, reached out to Marcus through social media to thank him for giving her hope, and they formed a friendship. She'd been a civil rights activist in the 1960s, had marched with Dr. King, had seen the arc of progress and setbacks, and she told Marcus, "Baby, what you did in that terminal was the same fight we've been fighting for generations. And every victory matters, every stand counts. Every voice that speaks up makes it easier for the next person." The teenager in the Letterman jacket, named Deshawn, sent Marcus a letter explaining that he'd been so inspired by watching Marcus maintain his dignity under attack that he was now considering military service himself, not just for the career opportunity, but because he wanted to be someone who stood for justice the way Marcus had. These ripple effects reminded Marcus why the struggle matters, why speaking up despite exhaustion matters, why demanding better despite the cost matters, because injustice thrives in silence, and every voice that breaks that silence creates space for others to breathe, to hope, to resist. Derek, meanwhile, struggled to find security work after his termination became public. Several news outlets had covered the story, and his name was now associated with racial profiling and abuse of authority. His own actions had created consequences he couldn't escape. A karmic justice that felt appropriate, even as Marcus took no pleasure in another person's suffering. The broader lesson from Marcus's experience spread through social media with hashtags like traveling while black and racial profiling stops, with thousands of people sharing their own stories of being denied service, questioned without cause, treated as suspects rather than customers, simply because of their race. The conversation forced transportation companies nationwide to review their policies, their training, their accountability measures, and while systemic change is slow and incomplete, Marcus's refusal to stay silent contributed to momentum that mattered. 3 months after the incident, Marcus was invited to Fort Benning's annual diversity and inclusion ceremony where he was recognized not for his military achievements but for his civilian courage. In facing down discrimination and demanding accountability, the base commander said in his remarks, Lieutenant Webb reminds us that the values we defend abroad, dignity, equality, justice, must be lived at home, and that fighting for those values doesn't only happen on battlefields but in bus terminals, in daily interactions, wherever human beings encounter systems of power and oppression. Marcus stood in his dress uniform, medals gleaming, and he thought about that day in the hoodie and jeans when those same medals meant nothing to Derek, when his humanity was invisible, and he felt the weight of that dual reality, celebrated here, criminalized there, that so many Black Americans navigate every single day. The moral of Marcus's story isn't just about one man standing up to one racist guard. It's about the broader truth that racial bias doesn't care about credentials, doesn't care about service, doesn't care about character. It sees only skin color and makes judgments from that superficial starting point. Marcus's military rank gave him leverage to fight back, but it shouldn't require exceptional status to receive basic respect. Every human being deserves to move through the world without having to prove their worth, without having to justify their existence, without having to fear that a routine interaction might turn into a life-threatening situation because of prejudice. Derek's downfall was swift and public, but the system that empowered him remains. And dismantling that system requires constant vigilance, constant voices speaking up, constant refusal to accept. That's just how it is. Marcus continued his military service, continued to speak out about racial justice, and continued to carry the knowledge that his uniform might protect him in some spaces, but couldn't shield him completely from a society that too often sees blackness as threat rather than humanity. And every time he travels, every time he stands in line at a terminal or checkpoint, he thinks about all the people who don't have the privilege of credentials to wave. And he remembers his responsibility to use his voice, his platform, his position to advocate for them, to demand better, to refuse to be silent in the face of injustice. Because silence is complicity. And in a world where racial profiling still determines who gets to board a bus, who gets stopped by police, who gets hired, who gets believed, speaking up isn't optional, it's essential. Thanks for watching Axiom USA, where we share stories that challenge injustice and celebrate resilience. Like, share and subscribe for more powerful narratives that need to be heard. And drop a comment telling us your thoughts on Marcus's experience and how we can all work together to end racial profiling.